2 days after that first mission, we were sent deeper than I had ever imagined. We flew all the way to Leipzig, just about the farthest you could go into Germany. That was the moment I truly learned what combat meant. That was when I learned what flak really was. Up there in the air, we stayed in constant contact through the intercom, calling out everything we saw, every burst, every flash, every threat. Back home in the United States, life had slowly started to recover from the Great Depression. Factories were running again, people were working, and entertainment was helping folks forget the hard times. But the damage from those years was still there. My family felt it hard. My father had owned a manufacturing and millinery business in St. Louis, Missouri, and he lost it all during the Depression. Still, my childhood was mostly normal. I was active, joined the Boy Scouts, and eventually earned my Eagle Scout. I went to college for 2 years. 1 year was at Washington University. But when the next semester came, my parents simply could not afford the $125 tuition. I knew then that the draft was coming for me. If I was going into the Army, I wanted to do it right. I wanted to be an officer. My uncle had graduated from West Point and served as an officer, and I looked up to him. Around that time, I came across a recruiting program from the United States Army Air Corps. They promised that in 6 months you could become a pilot, a bombardier, or a navigator. That was all I needed to hear. On July 6, 1942, I enlisted in the Aviation Cadet Corps. I was assigned to train as a bombardier. That meant I was stationed in the nose of the aircraft, right behind 250 caliber machine guns. I was sent to Laredo Aerial Gunnery School for 6 weeks. Honestly, it was exciting. We fired all kinds of weapons, especially those 50 caliber guns. After that came 12 weeks of bombardier training. Once I was commissioned, I was sent to MacDill Field in Tampa, Florida. At MacDill, they assembled the bomber crews. Each crew had 10 men. I was assigned to the 728th Bomb Squadron and placed on a B-17 bomber, the aircraft everyone called the Flying Fortress. Every man on that plane had a specific job and was trained only for that position. Our pilot was Joe Ontos. He was 22 years old. The co-pilot, Marty Atkins, was just 20. Our navigator, Hank Battaglia, was 25. I was 22. The 3 gunners were all 19 years old. The radio operator was about 23, and the flight engineer was 24. Looking back, we were just kids. Our plane was named Deuces Wild. The tail number was 297222. The pilots always got to name the aircraft, and most of them chose names connected to their hometowns, their wives, or their girlfriends. At the start of 1944, our crew was shipped to England. We knew why we were there. By then, Allied forces had pushed the Germans out of North Africa and had them on the defensive in Italy. The next step was Western Europe. Adolf Hitler's army was about to be hit head-on. It did not take long. Almost as soon as we landed in England, we were back in the air. My first mission came fast. On May 27, 1944, we bombed a heavy gun emplacement along the French coast. We were over enemy territory for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Compared to what came later, it felt easy. We called it a milk run. But that did not last. 2 days later, we flew to Leipzig. That flight changed everything. That was when I truly understood combat. That was when I learned what flak was. And through the intercom, we talked non-stop, warning each other, reporting what we saw, trying to stay alive. The warning came fast over the intercom. 9 o'clock. 10 o'clock. 11 o'clock. Enemy fighters were closing in. From my position in the nose, everything happened in a blink. I had maybe 2 seconds, that was it, to fire my guns before they were past us. That day, out of 18 planes, 3 never made it back. After a mission, the routine was always the same. We would land, go through the debriefing, then head back to our Quonset hut. And every so often, you would walk in and see empty bunks. For cots with no men in them. Guys you had eaten breakfast with that morning. Men you joked with, laughed with, complained with. And now they were just gone. You could not help but wonder. Were they killed? Were they prisoners of war? Did they bail out somewhere? Nobody ever had answers. That was the part that stayed with me the most. You survived, but you carried the weight of not knowing. And that happened far too many times. By June of 1944, everything was coming together. The war was finally being carried straight to Adolf Hitler's front door. It started with the massive Allied invasion of Normandy, something the world had never seen before. We were briefed late on the night of June 4th. Then we were sent away, only to be called back in the middle of the night on June 5th. That was when they told us the invasion had begun and gave us our targets. The sky was packed with airplanes. You could look in any direction and see nothing but bombers and fighters. Our first target that morning was a heavy gun position between Cannes and Sword Beach. The gates of Europe were finally open. While we were up there providing air support, the men on the ground were fighting for their lives on the beaches of Normandy. We took off around 2 in the morning and did not get back until about 9:30. After eating and reloading the aircraft, we were back in the air again by 3 o'clock. Our next target was a rail junction near Argentan, roughly 30 miles south of the beaches. We bombed it successfully. From the air, you could see the entire invasion stretched out below us. The coastline ran for about 50 miles, from Utah Beach all the way to Sword Beach. I later read that there were around 7,000 ships out there, including more than 4,000 landing craft. On the flight back to southern England, every road and highway was jammed with tanks, jeeps, ambulances, and supply trucks, all moving toward the coast. Casualties were already extremely high. I spent about 14.5 hours in the air that day. It was exhausting, but it was nothing compared to what the infantry went through on the ground. For us, it was a long day. For them, it was hell. Later on, during our 25th mission, we were flying at 27,000 feet over Munich. I remember thinking that this might be the one where we did not make it back. And then it happened. We were attacked head-on by German fighters, Messerschmitt 109 aircraft. Just in time, a squadron of P-51 Mustangs came in and chased them away. Almost immediately after, the flak exploded around us. About 10 seconds after I released the bombs, a piece of shrapnel tore through the nose of the plane. It smashed into the armored seats where the pilots sat, ripped through Marty's upper thigh, exited through the roof, and knocked out 2 engines. The only thing that saved Marty's life was the temperature. It was 40 degrees below zero, and the cold caused the bleeding to slow as the blood froze. We tried to divert to Switzerland, but the weather was too bad. The airfield was completely fogged in. As we kept losing altitude, Marty started bleeding again. For the last 3.5 hours of that flight, I stayed with him, holding pressure on his wounds so he would not bleed to death. We threw everything we could out of the aircraft to reduce weight. Anything that was not bolted down went overboard. I have often wondered what some German farmer thought when he found a bomber seat sitting in the middle of his field. But that is where it ended up. By the time we crossed the coast back toward England, we were flying at about 1,000 feet. We sent out a mayday call and told them we were preparing to ditch in the English Channel. That was how bad things looked. But somehow, we managed to stay airborne. We did not have to put the plane in the water. Against all odds, we made it back to our base. That was one more flight survived. In the end, I flew 35 missions over enemy territory. Every single one of them was dangerous. When I finished that 35th mission, I had earned the right to go home. But the truth is, going home was not as simple as it sounded. After being shot at that many times, I was not eager to return to normal life. I had seen enough. So instead of leaving right away, I stayed in England until March of 1945. Only then did I finally go home. We did not celebrate wildly. The war was still going on, and we knew it. We were happy, yes. Mostly, we were just grateful that we were still alive. When the war finally ended, I was stationed in Big Spring, Texas. Everyone was relieved. The fighting was over. But relief does not erase what you have seen or what you carry back with you. What stayed with me the most was not the parades or the handshakes. It was an American cemetery in France. 9,000 graves. That image never left me. The present moment was fine, but I could never forget those rows of white crosses and stars of David. 9,000 young soldiers who never made it home from the invasion. That was the part that stuck with me more than anything else. I was just one man out of 16 million Americans who served during the war. But every single job mattered. For us to fly, someone had to drive the trucks that brought the gasoline. Someone had to load the bombs and secure them in the aircraft. There were parachute packers, weather forecasters, mechanics, and medics. Every one of them played a role. My job may have been more dangerous than some, but it took all of us to win the war. It also took the people back home. The women building planes and ships, the factory workers, the farmers, the entire country. The whole United States was behind the war effort. That is how we made it through. Years later, I returned to France for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. I was one of the few still living who had taken part in those missions. People thanked me, shook my hand, and showed their appreciation. But in my mind, I was still thinking about the ones who did not come back. That is why these stories matter. Veterans of the Second World War are leaving us every day, and with them go their personal memories. That is why it is important to tell these stories now, while we still can. Sharing what we lived through keeps that history alive. And if people listen, remember, and pass it on, then those men who never came home are not forgotten.